All right, Shabbos, say good morning a lot. Say Baruch Hashem. To thank today's sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar, Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Dina Bas Pesach, Zachariah ben Zachariah. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Karen and Akiva Noach Andrews for dedicating the week of learning for the yahrzeit of Karen's mother, Marsha Bas David Vechana, and to thank Ari and Shoshana Lerner for dedicating today's learning, today the 4th of Adar, in commemoration of Ari's grandmother's yahrzeit, Mrs. Dina Gerber, Dina Bas Yehuda Leib. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. We also thank, we have an anonymous Daf Yomi sponsor. Okay, I don't see a dedication, but we thank the anonymous Daf Yomi sponsor. All sponsorships and all supports are always incredibly appreciated and welcome, of course. So we'll say with that, let us begin. So today's Daf is Pesachim. We have a lot to do today. A lot of incredible Gemara. We left off on Pei Vav Amud Days 86b, and we left off at the story of Rav Huna. So let's begin again. I will say, let's just pick up from the beginning of the story. Rav Huna breit Rav Nosson Ekel Bei Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. So we'll say this is almost right across from Tosas in Misarvin Lagadol on 86b. A great story. So Rav Huna breit Rav Nosson went to the house of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Amrulei Mashmecha. So they said, Rav Huna walks in. They say, "No, what's your name?" Amrulei Rav Huna. They said, "My name is Rav Huna." Amru Nesiv Marapuria, would you like to have a seat on the couch? Yosef, he sat down. Yavule Kasa, they offered him a cup of wine. Kabla Bechad Zimni, he accepted it on the first offer. The Shasi B'trei Zimni, and he drank the cup of wine, the glass of wine, in 2 gulps. Velo Ahader Apeh, and when he drank, he did not turn his face away. Amrulei, so they were very intrigued by Rav Huna's behavior. So they asked him a series of questions. Amrulei, my time Rav Huna, why do they call you Rav Huna? So we mentioned this yesterday. Amr Lahu Bal Hashem Ani. That's my name. And as Rashi pointed out, amazingly enough, I've always thought that Rav Huna, Rav was his title of distinction for his having achieved a level of scholarship. It turns out that that's not the case. It turns out that halacha l'maisa, that was his name. That was the name his parents gave him at his birth. I will say, and as I mentioned yesterday, kind of at the close of the shir, an incredible thing about the need for a parent to set expectations for children. Right? Parenting is this very fine balance and this very fine dialectic. You do not want to create undue pressure for your children. That's not healthy. Nor do you want to make your children in your own image of what you want them to be. But a parent must set expectations. And those expectations should be high. In accordance with the abilities of the child. But every parent needs to, because also think about this, if you set no expectations for your child, the message you're communicating is, I don't have that much faith in you. But if you set high expectations, what you say to your child is, I believe that you could accomplish something incredibly amazing. So his parents had pretty high expectations of him. So the Gemara says, so my time, why is it, Rav Huna, then when we told you to sit down on the couch, you sat down. What they were intrigued by was as follows. What they were intrigued by is, as we're going to see, they made a lot of offers to Rav Huna thinking that he would decline. So apparently, Talmudic, what's the right word? Etiquette, thank you. So Talmudic etiquette, excellent. Talmudic etiquette was, people would offer you something and you would refuse. We see this in halacha. For example, if you're asked to daven for the Amid, right? So the halachic etiquette is you're Masari. Again, Mishnah Berurah has a whole discussion about, if at 6:45 in the morning you're asked to daven, do not decline. Just get up there and go. Right? But the idea is, in general, there's a certain etiquette. So apparently, again, when you came over to someone's house and they offered you a couch to sit on, you said, no, thank you, the floor is more than comfortable. So they were intrigued that Rav Huna accepted the couch. So Amar Lahu, because Rav Huna said, I'll tell you why. Kamasha yomer alecha balabayis asay chutz mitzay. It was incredible, because Rav Huna said, there's a halacha. What's the halacha? When you're a guest in someone's home, anything that balabas, anything your host tells you to do, you have to do, except for get out. We've spoken about this before, right? So the Sasen has comments on this. He says, what a strange halacha. Can you imagine this? You're a guest at someone's house, and I think everybody said, okay, let's bench. right? And you're the guest, and you say, no, not yet. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. Let's maybe have a little more dessert. Let's schmooze, bring out another bottle of wine, right? Anything the Balabas tells you to do, you have to do except get out. The Sasama's comments so incredibly that this takana was instituted after the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. That after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, literally because someone asked a guest to get out, Chazal instituted, you can never order someone out of your house. And because of what the Shlah's famous commentary on this, that this is a reference to our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Balabayis. Anything the Balabayis tells you to do, you have to do. I'm a good soldier of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with one exception. Say, if the Ribono Shel Olam tells me get out, or if HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells me I don't want a relationship with you anymore, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Silber, I'm done with you, I could say, very nice, I'm not listening to you. I'm not listening to you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm not going anywhere. I'll listen to you for whatever else you tell me. Shabbos, Kashrus, whatever you want me to do, I'm going to do. But if you tell me to go away, I'm not listening to you, Ribono Shel Olam. Pretty incredible. That's the Shlach Kadosh. So my time, so same idea. Why is it when we offered you a glass of wine, you readily accepted it? In other words, you're normally supposed to decline a little bit. So the Gemara says, to which Rav Huna said, listen, I am a guest over here in Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's house. I will say, it is okay to refuse something from someone who is a regular individual. But when someone is a gadol, when someone is great, if they offer you something, you accept it. My time, why did you drink the glass of wine in 2 gulps? Right? Why not 1 gulp? So because again, Chazal said if a person, downs a glass of wine in 1 gulp, such a person is a gargaran, such a person is a gluttonous individual. Shnayim, if you go ahead and you drink in 2 sips, then derech eretz, that's the proper way. Shlosha, megasi aruach. This is interesting. If your glass of wine takes you 3 sips, that's arrogant. That's arrogant, right? People who sip apparently in 3 times, that's arrogance. My taima lo hadras apech. Why is it that when you drank, you did not turn your face away? In other words, they felt that ultimately, again, this was also meal etiquette. This was the proper tznius of a meal. The proper tznius of a meal is you don't eat looking right at someone. You go ahead and you turn your head. Amarle kala ma'apechas panat, which Rav Huna said, that's actually only a din by kala. That's only a din by a bride who was more self-conscious, but some people have, the Rashi says, ve'ein derech ha'ish lapoch panov. So interestingly enough, so Rashi says that it's a din in women, not a din in men, right? So women sometimes feel a little bit self-conscious eating in front of other people. Men have no such reservations, right? Men, so Rav Huna said, I don't have to turn my face. Right? That's not the derech of tznius by men. Incredible. Tanan Rabbi Yossi, let's listen to this story. Rabbi Shmuel went to the house of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yossi ben Lakunya. Yavulei kasa. So they gave Rabbi Yishmael a glass of wine. Kablei bechad zimna. Again, he accepted it with the first offer. V'shasye bechad zimna. He drank it with 1 gulp. They said to Rabbi Yishmael, Amri lei, lo savar lamar shosa kosa basachas harize gargaran. 1 second. Drinking a glass of wine with 1 gulp, is that not a bit gluttonous? So this is great. So Rabbi Yishmael says, Amri lahu. First of all, you guys have small cups. That's number 1. You have small glasses. So when they spoke about two gulps, that would have been if you would have given me a big boy cup, right? But what did you give me over here, right? It's a little nothing. So first of all, again, this din was not said in small glasses. Number 2, yenach masuk. Your wine is very sweet. So because it's very sweet, it goes down very quickly. Yenach masuk, and furthermore, again, I will say this is great. Ukrasi rechava, and have literally a wide stomach. Rabbi Shmuel was a large man, so again, he said, for someone like me, drinking down a small glass of sweet wine in 1 gulp, that's the normative form of consumption. Amr Rav Huna, we'll say the parak ends off. Amr Rav Huna, this is actually interesting halacha. B'nei chabur nichnasim b'shlosha. So we'll say if a chabura is eating together. Now Rashi points out over here. B'nei Chabura, B'nei Chabura lav b'Pesach koi. Shavuot says, so Rashi just points out, this is not referring to Korban Pesach, although interestingly enough, the Rambam happens to quote this halacha by Korban Pesach as well. In other words, what Rashi is saying is, the halacha that we're about to talk about over here is not limited to Karban Pesach. It applies to any time that you are eating a meal in an organized group. So just to give you we're eating a meal. Let's imagine we're all a chabura. We're eating in an organized group, and we've hired a shamish. We've hired a waiter. So now what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, "Bnei chabur nichnasim b'shlosha, v'yotzin afilu be'echad." So when bnei chabura come to sit down, halacha lamaisa, you could only force, so to speak. The shamish is only obligated to go ahead and begin serving the group when at least 3 members of the group have shown up. Again, we'll talk about all the qualifications. Rashi says, "Nichnasim b'shlosha lahasiv v'imba yachid oshnayim v'esebu ein ala shamish l'shamish." So we'll say, in other words, the shamish is not obligated to begin working, to spring into action until at least 3 members of the chabura show up. But if a couple of guys, 1 or 2 guys show up, the shamish is not obligated to start. So the Gemara says, However, when leaving the Su'udah, they are permitted to go ahead and leave the Su'udah one at a time, even though Rabbi said this creates more work for the waiter. Amar Rabba, so we'll say, first of all, number 1, this is only true if the chevra who's coming shows up at the appointed time. We'll say, what the Gemara is saying is like this: when people are part of a chabura for a meal, there's a certain etiquette as well. The shamish is not obligated to go ahead and start serving until at least 3 members of the chabura show up. But even then, that's only assuming they're showing up at the correct time. Let's say 3 guys, they come for dinner at, the dinner, the suda's at 6, and they come at 5. Even if there's 3 of them, the shamish is not obligated to go ahead and start serving them. Furthermore, again, the Rashi points out, the halacha is you also have to tell the shamish that we're going to be leaving one by one. So we'll say, you have to inform the shamish, because again, the idea over here is when people leave one by one, that creates more work for the shamish. So therefore, you have to go ahead and inform him about you have to inform him about how you're going to be leaving ahead of time. We'll say this is great. Ravina. So remember again, all of the participants in the meal split the cost of the waiter. In other words, your cost for the waiter is not dependent on how much you ate. So let's say, for example, Ruvain needed the waiter to come back to him 5 times. But that doesn't matter. Everybody shares in the cost of the waiter. But listen to this. We'll say this is great. The last guy who leaves the Suda has to leave a larger tip. He's got to leave a larger tip because after all, the Gemara will say, why? What's the logic? He's kept the waiter later. He's got to leave a later tip. But the halacha doesn't follow Ravina, namely again that all the participants in the Suda go ahead and share the cost of the waiter equally. Incredible. We'll say Hajjan alach keitzat. We'll say there's actually a lot of divrei hashkafa embedded in these Gemara as well. But it's 6:10, and we have we have to do today's daf. So let's begin. So we'll say Pei Zayin, Mazel Tov, Hadron Allah, Keitzat Solin, Mazel Tov. We'll say incredible new perek. Ha'isha, Bizman Shiba Beis Bailo. When a woman is in her husband's home. So we'll say now we're talking about, again, remember, in order to partake of Karban Pesach, you must be part of a chabura. Now we're going to discuss about interesting situations which come up when a person is potentially a part of 2 chaburas. So for example, Ha'isha, a woman, right, a married woman, Bizman Shiba Beis Baila, when she's living in her husband's home, Shachat ala Baila v'Shachat ala Aviyah. So let's say I have the following case, Halacha l'maisa, her husband shechted with her in mind, right? Makes sense. But her father also shechted with her in mind. So the shaila is, whose chabura is she a part of? So what's the halacha? Bizman Shiba Beis Baila, Shachat ala Baila v'Shachat ala Aviyah, Tolcha Mishal Baila. The assumption of what says the Mishnah is the halacha l'maisa, a married woman is part of her husband's home. So therefore, again, she's going to be part of her husband's chabura, not part of her father's chabura. That's the assumption. Holcha regel rishon lasos bebeis haber. So this is incredible. Let's say the couple just got married, and they're going the first yantiv to her parents. But it's actually quite interesting. Look at Rashi. Regel harishon kach derech hanesuos. Laleches lebeis avian regel avisharishon shachar nisrabo. So this is actually fascinating. It is the custom, the minhag Yisrael, that a married couple goes to the wife's parents for the first Yom Tiv after they're married. Very, very interesting. So let's say again, they're newlyweds. So now let's say their first Yom Tiv is Pesach, and they're going to the wife's family for the first days of Yom Tiv, or for all of Yom Tiv, whatever it is. So what's the halacha? Halcha rega rishon la'asal v'saviyah shachat ala aviyah v'shachat ala baila. So we'll say now same case, but this time they're in her parents' home. So we'll say in case number one, she was in her home with her husband. Her husband shechted for her. Her father shechted for her. So the Mishnah says she's part of her husband's chabura because mistama, a married woman, is together with her husband. What happens now? She's with her husband, but they go to her parents' house for Yom Tiv. Again, her husband shechted for her. Her father shechted for her. What's the halacha? Tochal b'makom shirotza. She could partake of whichever korban she wants. Now we'll discuss exactly the parameters of that, but she could partake of whichever korban she wants. Yasam sheshachtu ala apotropsin. Let's say the following situation: you have an orphan, and the orphan has apotropsin. We'll say apotropsin, literally translated, are trustees, individuals who manage the estate, the affairs of the yasam. Let's say again, there are two apotropsin, Reuven and Shimon. Both of them shechted a korban pesach. They're separate individuals, and both of them had in mind that the yasam would join them in their korban pesach. Yochel b'makom shurot. So the yasam could partake of whichever korban pesach he wants. Eved shel shnei shutvin. What happens if an eved belongs to two partners? An eved belongs to two partners. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Lo yochal mishel shneihen. So in that case, I will say he's not able. So again, Eved Kanani belongs to Reuven and belongs to Shimon. Remember, your Eved Kanani can partake of your korban pesach. But halacha l'maaseh, each owner shechted with him in mind. So halacha l'maaseh, he can't eat from either of them. I will say, why can't he eat on either of them? Because neither one owns him in full. So because of that, neither of them has the ability to kind of pull his entire identity. Now, but of course, if Reuven and Shimon both agree, okay, this year Eved Kanani will eat with you, Reuven, in a chinami, that could work. But assuming they made no such prior arrangement, he can't eat of either korban pesach. What happens if somebody is half Eved, half ben chorin? I will say we've seen this case before. It starts out with an Eved Kanani owned by two people, and one, Reuven and Shimon, and Reuven frees his chelek. When Reuven frees his chelek, that individual becomes a half Eved, half free man. Lo yochal mishal rabo. He does not have the ability to go ahead and eat as part of his master's korban pesach. Again, we'll see Rashi points out of here because we assume the master only had in mind for the tzad avdus shebo, not for the tzad chirus shebo. Again, we'll discuss the parameters of that case in the Gemara. But let's analyze the Mishnah. So remember again, the Mishnah said as follows. The Mishnah said in case number 2 in the Mishnah, where the woman is at, right, the married couple is at the woman's parents' house for their first Pesach. Her father shechts on her behalf and her husband shechts on her behalf. So what did the Mishnah say? She can eat from whichever korban she wants. Says the Gemara, Shamis Mina Yesh Breira. Oh, what do you learn from here? That we subscribe to the concept of Breira. So what's Breira? Retroactive clarification. Because what does the Mishnah sound like? The Mishnah sounds like, comes Pesach night, right? The husband brings out his korban Pesach. The father brings out his korban Pesach. And what does the wife do? What does the woman do? She decides wherever she wants. Now, what does it mean she decides? Remember, halacha l'maisa, in order to be part of a chabura, you have to really be part of the chabura as of when? As of when? The time of shechita. So obviously, if she's choosing on the Seder night which Pesach she's partaking of, there's obviously the concept of very attractive clarification, to which the Gemara says, no. My rotza b'shas shechita. What does it mean? She could eat of whichever korban she wants. It means that she could partake of whichever korban she wants, provided that she made that decision already at the time of shechita. So what it's saying is, she could choose to be part of whichever chabura she wants, her husband's chabura or her father's chabura, but lemaisa, she's got to choose. And when does she have to choose? At the time of shechita. So we'll say, just to point out, to contrast this with the first case, where let's say again, she's having Pesach in her home with her husband, but her husband shechts on her behalf, her father shechts on her behalf. In that case, there is no need for any active decision, because the assumption is that, of course, she's part of her husband's chabura. But if she's at her father's home, and her father's shechting for her, and her husband's shechting for her, and it's her first Yom Tiv, there she must make an active decision, b'shas shchita, whose chabura she is a part of. So the Gemara says, or minor is a kasha, isha regel harishon acheles mishalaviha. A woman on her first Yom Tiv after she's married and she's at her father's home, she eats of her father's korban pesach. Mikan ve'ilach rotza chalas mishal avia, rotza mishal baila. From that point on, if she wants to eat from her father, she can eat from her father's. From her husband, she can eat from her father's. So we'll say, so what's going on over here? It's a kasha. To which the Gemara says, lo kasha, kan beradufa lelech, kan in redufa lelech. So we'll say it depends on the case. One is the case where redufa literally means she's exceedingly eager. She's exceedingly eager to go to her father's home, and one is where she's not exceedingly eager. We'll say, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Maslisa b'she'in redufa, lelech tamid lebeis aviha, debeis baila chavivla, hilchach kol shar haragalim vaday sheicha basrei, beregal arishon safek, ubraisa beredufa hilchach regal arishon vaday basra avia mikan ve'elech safek. So we'll listen to this. If a woman is exceedingly eager to go back to her parents' home, so in that case, again, on the first Yom Tiv, after she's married, she's going to be part of her father's Karban Pesach. From that point forward, if she's still exceedingly eager to go home, it's going to be a suffix. Is she part of her father's Pesach? Is she part of her husband's Pesach? But in a quote-unquote more normal case, where she's not exceedingly eager to go home, she's a married woman. So on the first Yom Tiv, ultimately, again, she has to make a decision. Is she part of her father's chabura, part of her husband's chabura? But for every subsequent Yom Tiv, the assumption is, the default is that she is part of her husband's chabura. So we'll say now, the Gemara is going to get into some incredibly beautiful agarata. Now that we mentioned this husband-wife relationship, so the pasuk says over here, As hayisi be'inav kimotzeis shalom. I was then in his eyes, this is from Shir Hashirim, I was then in his eyes like someone who finds shalom. Or I found shalom in his eyes. So Amr Rabbi Yochanan, kekala shenimseis shlema b'beis chameha, v'rot falelech lahagid shvacha b'beis aviha. That Klal Yisrael in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu were like a kala who found favor in her father-in-law's, in her in-laws' eyes, and runs home to tell her parents, right? So we'll say if a bride is beloved by her in-laws, that's obviously a beautiful accomplishment, that's very special, and she'll go and tell her parents how much her in-laws love her. So that's like Klal Yisrael. Kidichsiv, v'ayo bayom ahu ne'um Hashem, tikri ishi, v'lo tikri li od baili. And it will be on that day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you will no longer call me Ishi, or you will no longer be called, you will be called Ishi and not be called Baili. Both say there's a difference between Ishi and Baili. Baili means master. Ishi means husband, which comes with a connotation of intimacy. So Klal Yisrael says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the day will come where you will not simply be my master, but you will be my husband, representing the idea that the day will come when Klal Yisrael will be zochet to forge a meaningful and intimate relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. Like a kala in her father-in-law's home, and not like a kala in her father's home. I'll say, what does this mean? Before the couple is married, the kala lives in her father's home. After the couple is married, it was common often for the kala to go with her husband to live in her in-laws' home. So when they're in the in-laws' home, that represents the husband and wife are living together as husband and wife. So in this pasuk, Klal Yisrael, putting forward this anticipatory wish and desire that we want the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu to transform from something quote-unquote platonic, like Baili, to Ishi, to something intimate and passionate. Achos lanu kitana v'shadayim eila. So we'll say, so now the Gemara continues quoting the pasuk from Shir Hashirim. Literally translated, we have a young sister and her breasts have not developed. So what does this mean? So supposed to remember again, all of Shir Hashirim is a metaphor. So what does the metaphor represent? Rabbi Yochanan, zu Elam. So I'll say this is incredible. This refers to the city of Elam. Elam was a city in Bavel, as we're going to see. Shezachsa lilmod v'lo zachsa lilamed. Ultimately, again, Elam, there was a lot of Torah that was taught in Elam, but interestingly enough, Elam did not produce Talmidei Chachamim. Ani choma v'shadai kamigdalos. So I will say again, the same, well, not the same, the different matter. I am like a wall, v'shadai. My shadayim are like migdalos, like towers. What does that mean? Rabbi Yochanan, ani choma, I am a wall, zutora. V'shadai kamigdalos, what does that refer to? Eilu talmidei chachamim. This refers to Torah scholars. I'm both saying now, what's the connection between Shadayim and Talmidei Chachamim? So remember again, just like the Shadayim provide sustenance to the baby, so too again Talmidei Chachamim provide sustenance through the Torah that they teach. The Rava Amar Rava says, Ani choma zu knesses Yisrael. I am a wall. This refers to Klal Yisrael. V'shadai kemigdalos. What does this refer to? Elu bate kinesios ubate midrasha. So both say this is so beautiful. That what does it mean? I am the wall. That's Klal Yisrael is the wall. The wall represents something strong and sturdy. The Shaddai Kamigdalos, literally again, Shaddai breasts like towers. What does that refer to? Elu bate knesios ubate midrasha. So listen to this. The Shaddayim metaphor is always one of sustenance, of sustaining. So in the first model, ultimately again, it's a reference to Talmidei Chachamim who sustain the cloud through their Torah. Here Abba says sustenance comes in the form of shuls and batei medrash. Isn't that beautiful? You know, we often look at a shul or base medrash as a place I go to learn, a place I go to daven. But lemaisa, it's a place that sustains me. It's a place that sustains me. And I will say, I think, again, a Gemara like this is always powerful, but especially we know what it's like to be without the shul. And we know what it's like to be like without the base medrash, without being able to come to a makom. But I'll say, it's not just a place. It's not just an address. You walk inside these walls and they sustain you. You walk inside these walls and they spiritually nurse you. You walk inside these walls and they nourish you. That's the power of coming to the base medrash, of coming to shul. It's incredible. Amar Rav Zutra Bar Tovia, Amar Rav, Mai dichsev asher b'neinu kinetiyim migudalim b'nuarim. So we'll say now, quoting another pasuk, this time from Tehillim. Literally, asher b'neinu kinetiyim migudalim b'nuarim. Our sons are like saplings growing strong in their youth. Binosenu kizavios michutavos tabnes heichal. Our daughters, literally are like corners that are hewn out in the form or in the shape of the Beis Hamikdash, of the heichal. So what does this mean? This is beautiful. Asher banenu kinetiyim. What does it mean? Our sons are like saplings. Elu bachuri Yisrael shelo tamu tamchet. This refers to the young Jewish men who did not taste the taste of sin. We'll say, what does this mean? Who did not taste the taste of sin? This refers to young Jewish men who exercise self-control and do not give in to their desires. We'll say, so we know again, the greatest koach that we possess in life is the koach of self-control. And remember, we'll say, to be 80 years old and with your walker with the tennis balls on the bottom, and to be able to resist your Yetzer Hara, that's still an accomplishment, but not as great of an accomplishment as to have the full vigor of youth and go ahead and say, you know what? No, I'm not going to give in to my temptations. So that's the young men who are like saplings. What does it mean? Our daughters are like the corner. What does that mean? Elu besulos Yisrael. This refers to the young women. The young women. Besulos literally means are virgin. She'ogdos pischehen lebalein, who literally again keep their openings tied for their husbands. So we'll say on the most basic level, Rashi says it refers to the fact that the Jewish women are modest, and therefore they do not engage in any type of premarital sexual activity. So this, again, isn't it incredible that the pasuk over here is extolling the virtue of young people, that the ability when I'm young to exercise self-control, right? When ultimately, again, passions are at their highest and often one's personal vigor is also very much intact. The ability to exercise self-control in those moments is the greatest accomplishment. Omer umalu kizmizra kizavios mizbeach iwaisei mehacha mizavinu alei mefikim mazon alzan mechov tos tabnes heichal elu ve'elu. So again, these are just different psukim highlighting the same metaphor. Elu ve'elu mala alein akasuv kila nivna heichal biyamehen. Both say, but elu ve'elu means the young men and the young women who resist temptation. Ultimately, again, it is as if the Beis Hamikdash has been rebuilt in their times. But I'll say, isn't that absolutely incredible? Isn't it absolutely incredible that sometimes the greatest accomplishment in life is self-restraint? So, which is fascinating because we often think the greatest accomplishment in life is something you positively do. But yet here the Gemara is telling us sometimes the greatest accomplishment is the ability to exercise self-restraint, which we'll say, from a chinuch perspective, is also so incredibly important. That's why we have to be so careful not to get our children every single thing, and not to give in to every single demand, and once again, to place limitations, because children who grow up without a chinuch of self-restraint, of limitations, become adults who lack self-restraint. And adults who lack self-restraint accomplish very little in this world, at least ba'olam haruchni. So you see the Gemara is saying over here, for a young person to exercise self-restraint, that accomplishment is ki'ilu nivna heichel biyamehen, is as if the Beis Hamikdash was built literally in their days. The power, and we'll say this applies to all stages in life, because Chazal are telling us the power of self-restraint, the power to hold myself back. Sometimes, especially in the society in which we live, the goal is satisfy every pleasure. Satisfy every pleasure. If you want it, have it. If you want it, you enjoy it. Self-restraint is part of what is the cornerstone of Kiddusha. And if we teach it to our children when they're young, hopefully they grow up into adults. And hopefully as adults, we're able to instill this midah in ourselves as well. Incredibly important. These Rabbos say, listen to this. This is incredible. An incredible, incredible Gemara. Tivar Hashem asher haya el Hoshe me'oz yosam achaz Yechizkiah melech Yehuda. So we'll say, the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to the Navi Hosea. Beperak echad nisnav udalid devim. They also say, interestingly enough, there was a period in Jewish history where there were actually 4 concurrent prophets. The Gadol Shebekulan Hosea, the greatest amongst them was the Navi Hosea. Shneimar, Tchilas Devar Hashem b'Hosea. So literally, again, the Tchilas Devar Hashem, God's first words were to Hosea. So the Gemara says, really? Hosea was the first person God spoke to. Valo, Mimoshe ad Hosea, Kamanevim. There are a lot of prophets between Moshe and Hosea. Rabbi Yochanan, Tchila la'arba neviim shenisnavu ba'osa perek. Let's say what it means is Hosea was the greatest prophet amongst the other 4 who lived at the same time that he did. Who were they? The Elohein, Hosea, Yeshaya, Amos, and Micha. I will say, can you imagine living during these times? There are 4 Nevi'im are there. Hosea, Yeshaya, Amos, Micha. I just want to point out, by the way, what was the impact that 4 Nevi'im had on Klal Yisrael? Very minimal. Very minimal. I will say these were not good times. Remember again, Yeshaya is the prophet of destruction. These are not. So I just want to point out something amazing. How Lamaisa sometimes we think, if only we had a Navi. If only we had a Navi. There were plenty of times that Klal Yisrael had a Navi, right? And ultimately, again, did not listen to the Navi. And the Navi told them explicitly, if you keep doing this, this is going to happen. And yet, we just didn't pay attention, because the truth is, it's not about Nevi'im. So this is the segue. It's not about Nevi'im. It's about self-restraint. It's about a willingness to rein one's self in and not to run wild and unchecked. And as long as a person is not willing to rein themselves in, Moshe Rabbeinu could be whispering in your ear, and it won't make one shred of difference. So Hosea, we'll say, listen to this. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu will say, this is the story of the Navi Hosea. So it's good, because most of us, I would imagine, have never ever learned Hosea. Maybe we just heard his name for the first time, right? As we're learning this Gemara. So now, even if you never crack open the Navi, you're going to get the story. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hosea, Banecha chatu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Hosea, your sons have sinned. V'hayu lo lomar. So we'll say, so what was HaKadosh Baruch Hu expecting from Hosea? Hosea should have said, Hayu lo lomar Banechahim. Banechahim. What do you mean, my kids? Right? What do you mean, my sons? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they're your kids. They're your kids. Bnei Chanunecha. Bnei Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yakov. They are the sons, literally, again, of your tested ones. Right? The sons of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Gilgal rachamecha alehen. Ultimately, have compassion on them. So we'll say, but Hosea didn't say this. Lo daya shelo amar kach. Not only did Hosea not say this, Ela amar lefanav Ribbono Shalom kol ha'olam shelchahu ha'avirem bu'uma acheres. Wow. So Hosea says to Baruch Hu, listen, good news is God, your God. So you just swap them out for another nation. Okay, you don't like them. Just swap them out. We'll say, so first of all, why would Hosea say this? Why would Hosea say such a thing like this? So we'll say, what do you see from here? That leaders reach a frustration point. That even the most optimistic and visionary of leaders, when they can't get traction with their flock and constituents, give up hope. Give up hope. Hosea, this was not his natural disposition. But what do you do when day in and day out you're trying to elevate the people, trying to move a people, trying to inspire people, and they're not budging? They're not budging. Hosea gave up on the people. He gave up. He says, God, I'm with you. I have nothing to say. Remember, the job of the Navi is to be the defender of Klal Yisrael. Hosea says, I've got nothing to say. All I could tell you is, you're God, you could do anything, swap him out for someone else. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu was incredibly disappointed. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ma aseh lezaken zeh. What should I do for this old man? To this old man. So Rabbi Shalom was very disappointed. Why? Because he felt Hosea failed. He felt Hosea failed. The job of the Navi is not only to be the mouthpiece of God to the people, but the job of the Navi is to be the ultimate advocate and defender. That's the job description of the Navi as really created by Moshe Rabbeinu. Mouthpiece of God to the people, but also ultimate advocate and defender of Klal Yisrael. So the Ribbon Shalom is very upset and disappointed with Hosea. What should I do with that? And he was upset because Hosea said it what's the word, flippantly? Just swap him out. Just swap, they're your kids, swap them out for someone else. Listen to this. Omer Lo. So we'll say this is, the story of Hosea is one of the most wild stories in all of Navi. So Omer Lo, Lech v'kach isha zona. Hosea, here's what I want you to do. I want you to marry a prostitute. I want you to go and marry a harlot, go marry Shazona, and you're going to have kids with her. And then after you have kids with her, and then I'm going to tell you to divorce your wife, send away your kids. If you could do that, then I'll send Klal Yisrael away. So we'll say, so now watch this story. Now, I just want to point out, there is a machlokes hamefarshim in Hosea, in the Navi Hosea, about whether this actually happened or it was a nevuah of Hosea. So did Hosea actually physically go through these actions? Or again, was it a prophetic vision to teach Hosea lessons? Machlokes. So let's say, get ready for this. V'yomer Shema Hosea, lech kach lecha isha zenunim. Do me a favor. I want you to go marry a harlot. I want you to go. So I'll say, so just want to point out, can you imagine the scandal over here? Can you imagine the optics of this? Hosea is the Navi Yisrael. And Kadosh Baruch Hu tells him, I want you to marry a prostitute. Uksiv, vayilech vayikach es Gomer bas Divlayim. He married a woman, her name was Gomer, the daughter of Divlayim. So I'll say, why was her name Gomer? So that wasn't her given name, apparently, that was more a descriptive name. Amarav Shakol Gomrim Ba. Why? Because everyone finished in her, right? So we'll say, which is a, okay, I don't think you require Rashi, right? I'm just saying, I'll say, so again, this was how she was. Can you imagine? This was her name. This was her name. It's not the pshat. People mumbled. I think maybe she's a zona. I think maybe she's her name was Gomer. Her name was Gomer because it was known what her profession was. Bas Divlayim Amud Beis. Yeah, I'm sorry about that side of that Amud Beis over there. I tried to keep that from you as long as possible. But all right, good. Bas Divlayim. Dibara Bas Dibara. We'll say if it was bad enough, her mother was also a prostitute, so it was in the mishpacha, right? So again, she's a second generation at this malacha already. So what happens? Ushmul Amar Shemusuka b'fiakol kidvela. Others say Bas Divlayim. She was as sweet to everyone like a devela, like a cake of pressed figs. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Shakol Dashin ba kidvela. Everybody threshed in her like one threshes on a cake of pressed. Again, obviously the idea being that I both say this woman. I guess there's like a recreational zona. On the weekends, but then there's like a person who's mamish, it's her name itself, which also tells you that znus was her entire essence. Everything about her was znus. Even her name, Gomer Bas Divlayim. So davar acher, Gomer Amar Yehuda shebikshu ligmar mamonon sheisal biyameha. Others say, interestingly enough, that her name Gomer, I will say, was actually not a description of her, but somehow a metaphoric description of what was happening in the times. This time, Klal Yisrael was oppressed by the armies of Aram, and during her days, Aram wanted to deplete the Jewish people of all their money. In fact, they did take the money of Klal Yisrael. Okay, so we'll say, so now what happens? So now, Hosea marries this woman, Gover Bas Divlayim. And I will say, remember again, whether actually vision, whatever it is, Vatar v'teled bain. So they have a child together. This is the offspring. This is the offspring of Hosea and Gomer Bas Divlayim. So Vatar v'teled bain. Vayomer Hashem Elov Kra Shmo Yisrael. Go ahead and name him Yisrael. That's his name. Rabbi will say, now why is his name Yisrael? Ki od ma'at ufakarati as demei Yisrael al beis Yehu ve'shavti mimalchus beis Yisrael. Because if you look at Rashi says over here, Yisrael she'asid ani lezoram v'lezrosam magola. So we'll say Yisrael literally means is a contraction that ultimately, again, I will plant Klal Yisrael and scatter them in the Golus. So Yisrael is a name descriptive of, I will plant Klal Yisrael everywhere. I'm going to take them out of Eretz Yisrael, plant them everywhere. And also, furthermore, again, we'll talk about this revenge piece as well. Vatar ol vateled bas. Then again, Gomer bas Tivlayim has another child. Vayomer lo kara shma lo ruchama. Name her lo ruchama. We'll say that's her name. Lo ruchama. I will not have compassion. Not very popular present day names. I will say lo ruchama. Interesting. Ruchama is a more common name, but lo Ruchama, that's her name. I will not have compassion. Ki lo osif od arachim es beis Yisrael, ki nasa esalahem. Good, because ultimately I will not have any more compassion on Klal Yisrael. Vatar vateled bein. They had a third child. Vayomer Hashem Elav kara shmo lo ami. Let's say these are wild names. Third son, name him. You are not my nation. Lo ami. Ki atem lo ami va'ani lo ehye lachem. Liachar shenod lo shnei banim ubas achos. After Hosea has 3 children with Gomer bas Tivlayim, 2 sons and 1 daughter. Amar LaKadosh Baruch Hu lo Hosea. So Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Hosea, listen, lo hayeh lecha lilmod mimoshe rabcha. You should have learned from Moshe, because what happened with Moshe? Shekevan shedibarti imo perish mina isha. Af ata badal atzmecha mimena. So Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Hosea, listen, Hosea, you're a Navi. Moshe was a Navi. Just like Moshe separated from his wife when it became clear that the word of God was going to constantly come from him, so to Hosea, you're my man, you're the guy, and so I'm going to talk with you all the time. You need to separate from your wife as well. And you need to send her away. Amar Ribono Shalom. So Hosea says, Kadosh Baruch Hu, yesh li banim mimena, ve'ini yachol otzia. Kadosh Baruch Hu, we have children together. We have 3 kids. What do you want me to do? You want me just to send her away? You know, Hosea. So Rosh says, now Hosea, now you understand. First of all, Hosea, your wife is a zona. Okay, that's number 1. And your children are the offspring of a zona. So we'll say it appears that Gomer bas Tivlayim did not give up her profession even once she landed this shidduch, right? So again, she was still a zona. So Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Hosea, you don't even know if those kids are yours, right? You don't even know if they're, so your wife is a zona, you don't even know if the kids are yours. And yet what? And yet you can't send them away. You can't send them away because it's your wife and it's your kids. Kach Yisrael shehein b'nei Banai, b'nei Bechanuni, b'nei Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yakov. So ultimately, Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Hosea, now do you understand? Now do you understand how painful it is for me to contemplate the sending away of my children? Who are my children? Who are my children? They are definitively my children. They are the sons of my tested ones, of my chosen ones, the sons of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And while it's true that they've done terrible, terrible things, do you understand why it's so difficult for me to send them away? They are one of the 4 things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, which I truly own in this world. What are the 4 things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu owns in this world? Torah kinyan echad, one of them is Torah. Dichsev Hashem konei reishes darko. Shemayim va'aretz kinyan echad. HaKadosh Baruch Hu owns the earth and the heavens. That's another kinyan. Dichsev konei shemayim va'aretz. Beis HaMikdash kinyan echad. HaKadosh Baruch Hu owns the Beis HaMikdash. Dichsev har zeh konse yemino. Yisrael kinyan echad. And Klal Yisrael themselves, we are one of the kinyanim, one of the acquisitions, one of the things that the Ribono Shalom owns in this world. Dichsev am zukanisa. The ata amarta havirim be'uma acheres. And you, Hosea, had the chutzpah to suggest that I should swap them out for another nation. So now the Ribono Shalom says to Hosea, do you now understand why your suggestion was so ridiculous and why your suggestion was so hurtful? Kevan sheyada shechata amad levaki shrachim alatzo. When Hosea realized what he did, he asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu for forgiveness. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ad she'atem mevaki shrachim al atzmecha, baki shrachim al Yisrael, shegazarti aleim shalosh gezeros ba'avurecha. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Hosea, before you ask for forgiveness for yourself, ask for forgiveness for Klal Yisrael. Because as a result of you, I have levied upon them 3 gezeros. So what's the name 3 gezeros? Each of the names of Hosea's children represented another gezerah against Klal Yisrael. Yisrael, lo ruchama, lo ami, all represented three gezeros against Klal Yisrael. So before you daven for yourself, Hashemah who says to Hosea, daven for Klal Yisrael. Amadu bikesh rachamim ubatal gezerah. Ultimately, Hosea got up, he davened, and as a result of his tefillos, Kadosh Baruch Hu rescinded the gezeros of Yisrael, lo ami and lo ruchama, lo ami. V'hischil levarchan. And ultimately, again, Hosea begins to bless Klal Yisrael. Shneimar, v'yom mispar b'nei Yisrael kechol hayam, v'haya makom she'amar lehem lo ami atem, yomer lehem b'nei kel chai, v'nikbetzu b'nei Yehuda b'nei Yisrael yachtov, v'zarati ali ba'aretz, v'rechamti es lo ruchama, v'amarti lo ami ata. So we'll say, you see over here that literally again in the brachos of Hosea took each of the klalos, Klal Yisrael will not be scattered. They will be planted in Am Yisrael. Kadosh Baruch Hu will not say, I will not have compassion, I will have compassion. Kadosh Baruch Hu will not say, they are not my nation, rather they are my nation. So Kadosh Baruch Hu turned around all of the klalos into, Hosea turned around all of the klalos into bracha. So we'll say incredible. Amr Rabbi Yochanan, Oy lo l'Rabbanos, shemikaveres says baila. Interesting Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan says, woe to those who are in the Rabbanos, because ultimately, again, it buries those who take it on. Now, I will say now, what this means is this is not just Rabbanos, right? Rabbanos over here in this context means leadership. Woe to those who take on positions of leadership, because positions of leadership usually bury those who go ahead and take them on. Shabbos means this idea that those who engage in positions of Jewish leadership usually age prematurely. I'll say the example of this, the greatest example was Shmuel HaNavi. Shmuel HaNavi died at the age of 52. But yet the Navi calls him a Zakein. So what's going on? So the Gemara explains, because Shmuel HaNavi, it was hard. It was hard. He had a lot on his shoulders. And because he had a lot on his shoulders, his responsibilities ultimately buried him. Listen to this. She'in lecha kol Navi v'Navi shelo kipach arba malachim b'yamar. We'll say it's incredible. The average Navi in the days of Nevi'im saw 4 kings. So isn't that incredible? In the days of one Navi, 4 kings. Why was there such turnover in the kings? Well, sometimes it's because they killed each other. But other times it was just because being the king, right, being vested with the responsibility for Am Yisrael, it ages a person prematurely. And ultimately, again, sometimes buries the individual who bears that responsibility. Shnei Amar, Chazon Yishaya ben Amos, Asher Chaza al Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yochanan, Mipnei ma Zacha Yeravam ben Yoash Melech Yisrael lehimanos in Malchi Yehuda. That was an interesting story as well. Why is Rabbi say we'll have to stop over here? We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem with this Gemara. It's a very short blot tomorrow, so we'll be fine. We'll be fine in Meretz Hashem. We'll pick up over here again. Incredible Gemara to be continued in Meretz Hashem.